Hello, I'm Sarah Kay Bierle with Emerging Civil War, and today my good friend Stephanie Huffman, who is the CEO of Epiphany Creative Services in Nashville, Tennessee, is joining me to chat about another aspect of women involved in historic preservation. Now, you might be kind of wondering, this is a little different than some of the other interviews we've seen featured this month. You're not talking with someone who works in the history field. And that's the exact point, because so many of us are involved in historic preservation, but we might not do it for our day job or our side hobby or things like that. So Stephanie's going to be sharing a little bit about what she's been learning about preserving pieces of her family's past. And this has kind of brought to mind for me that so many women from the Civil War era were the ones preserving the letters and the diaries, which we now have access to in archives. Or those letters and diaries might still be sitting in your attic, in that box under your window. And what do we do with it now? So Stephanie, do you want to share a little bit about how you got interested in your family history and kind of what the beginning of that journey has looked like for you?
Yes, and Sarah, thank you for this opportunity to share that because I am a novice. I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to history, but my grandmother had given me a book years and years ago, and it was showing that this was a book that someone had taken the time to write our family history. And I looked at it and I thought, okay. And as I read it, I thought, I need to start organizing this. So I put it, I didn't know what I was doing. So I put it into a type of Word document where I started listing the people. And I started learning a lot. And I handed it off to a cousin of mine on another branch of the family that is not part of this branch. And he came up with a photo through ancestry.com. And I decided to print that off and give it to all the women of our family because at the head of this book, coming over in 1774, was a patriarch that we were a part of. And that's the son of the patriarch. And I thought, oh, this is incredible. And that's where it started.
Wow, that is fascinating. Now I know, because we've been having some conversations, that you've been exploring part of your family tree, some ancestors who were alive during the Civil War period, or that antebellum era just before the conflict starts. So did you want to share a little bit about who you've discovered and the
Oh my
family
goodness.
stories that you're starting to trace down and actually find documentation for?
Yes, I was stunned that as I began looking around at the things I had, I didn't realize that I had a family Bible I had never really opened and looked at. And so I went down and I got the family Bible and I opened it and I looked at the births and the deaths and took pictures of all those, but I really didn't know what I was doing. And then one day it dawned on me, my grandmother had given me a beaded bag. And I thought, I need to go down and look at that. And I went down and I got the beaded bag. And this is years later. And I opened it and there was an envelope like this. And inside the envelope was a crumbling piece of paper that I put on a.
Oh, wow.
I started to piece together with tweezers. It turned out to be an obituary. And I thought, okay, now who is this person? And of course I reached out to you and I said, I can't read the full obituary. I have enough pieces of a puzzle and I have enough things in front of me that I'd like to know more. Mm-hmm. Well, what astounded me was that through your help, not only did we find the actual obituary, but we found the trunk, a photo of a trunk of the husband. Then I discovered that she was the sister of one of the gentlemen who was part of the Underground Railroad. Then I discovered that she was a sister of a gentleman who was in the Civil War, and there were three others in the Civil War. One had been taken prisoner. One had been shot by a cannonball. I mean, it was just stunning. And I thought, my goodness. And the Civil War piece, I guess I wasn't prepared for that, but they were from Ohio, and they were all in the 95th Regiment, Ohio Volunteers, and it appears they were under Captain Tate. And it was her brother or her brother-in-law, and then her brothers, and then I think some nephews. And again, like I said, one had a ball passed through the head. One was taken prisoner at the Battle of Richmond, Kentucky. One was under Captain Pickering in the cavalry, and he had a ball to the knee but recovered. And there were just other things. One was killed on the battlefield. And I was just stunned. I wasn't prepared for all the little details that I started to find.
Right. And that's, as you dive into family history, it just starts coming alive and realizing that there are those connections to the past. And I know some of the things you've shared with me are on my research list to follow up a little more for you to see if we can find some more information there. And thank you for mentioning the unit, because there might be someone who's going to be watching this interview who very well might be an expert on that unit and will be able to reach out and possibly get in touch. And that's just one of the great things about the history community, whether it's working with genealogists or military historians. When we start bringing all the information together, we can start getting a more full picture of these people's lives in the past and understanding what our ancestors' lives, and in this case, Civil War experiences, were like. Thank you so much for sharing that. So one of the things that always comes up when we're looking at family history is, what do we do with it? And here you have some fantastic artifacts, particularly the beaded purse, maybe some the family Bible, things like that. Do you have some plans on what you want to do with those? Will you be keeping them and preserving them, or what are you thinking about at this time?
Right. So I am going to reach out to the museum that is in Reynoldsburg, Ohio. And I'm going to let them know that I have a beaded bag of one of the people in their town who was probably pretty prominent. Like I said, the obituary is a woman who's a sister to the gentleman who was part of the Underground Railroad. So I'm sure there's some interest there. My family Bible will go to my cousin, as she has many children and I do not. It's fair that she's the next in line of our family, and so she should have it. And so I'm preparing all the documentation and trying to give her a picture so that these things aren't just things on a table, but that she realizes these are my family and this is my ancestry.
Right, and that's so great that you're looking at those options. I know so often those pieces of family history don't have the documentation, the context, even the old family story about it written down and put with it. And then, you know, when it passes to the next generation, sometimes a lot of those stories are lost along the way. And so writing it down, bringing it all together, and having ideas for where to share it is so important, such a part of preserving these pieces of the past. So if someone's listening and maybe this is the first time that they're thinking about doing some looking at family history, maybe doing a little genealogy, or they have an artifact that they're really curious about, is there something in your journey that was really helpful or that you would recommend as an interesting starting place?
It was hard because I had all these pieces of a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle, dumped out on a table, and I didn't know where to begin, and it was frustrating. But I just kept going slowly, and it's sort of like that commercial for Ancestry.com where someone begins and they get a leaf, and every so often you get a leaf, and it leads to the next leaf, and you start to realize, oh my goodness, excuse me. And then, of course, having opportunity to reach out to certain individuals who can help you is critical, because it does help put the pieces together. I think the critical piece was the family Bible, Had I not had the family Bible, I could not start piecing together the individuals. Had someone years ago not created a book for our family, I would never have known who was who was who. And it took time. It took Excel spreadsheets and Word documents and laying things down on the table. But if you're patient, the magic comes through.
That's great. And it's so nice that you had those helpful starting places with the Bible and that earlier documentation as well.
Yes.
I know a lot of people build that just starting from census records and things like that using tools like Ancestry. I know one of the tools that I used, because I have a subscription to it, that was helpful was newspapers.com. We just started putting in a few of your ancestors' names, and then once we had some military references, looking at that. So that can be a helpful tool as well. And then just if you know you have an ancestor who was a soldier in the Civil War or connected to a unit, just always do a search for the basic military history. Some regiments have great regimental histories that can be a good starting place to then follow up, see if there was any further citations or information about that individual you might be trying to research. So
it was lovely because that crumbled obituary was what started it all. And then that beaded bag leading to the crumbled obituary and not knowing who this person was. And then to realize it was my great-great-grandmother's sister, and that she was the sister of the gentleman who had the house that was part of the Underground Railroad, and then realizing they had a brother who was in the Civil War and that he had sons, and then there were nephews. One thing just led to the other, and you've got to be patient. But if you hang in there, the puzzle starts to come together.
It does. And one of the things that I find really inspirational about this journey that you've been on is it kind of started with a woman's beaded bag and then this obituary, and your grandmother had given you that important book of family history that someone else had put together, and now you're the next woman in this chain, if you will, of preserving your family history. And it's really great to hear how you're looking for ways to pass that on to others in your extended family, or to reach out to the local history groups and just help them be aware. That's really a great way to kind of honor your family's legacy. And it continues that women preserving history, which is really inspiring and something that I think doesn't get highlighted quite enough.
Right. And I think that my cousin doesn't know this is all coming. But once I put things together and lay the groundwork for her and say, I want to share something with you, she will embrace it as much as I do, and she'll take it to the next level and pass it down to her children. But it takes someone who has a little bit of time and a lot of interest and intrigue and mystery, and then just keep going, keep going, keep going. Put it down, though, for the next generation. Don't just sit on it. I've got Excel spreadsheets, I've got Word docs, and I'm grateful. And just keep documenting what you find.
And we should acknowledge that there are lots of very fine gentlemen who do the exact same thing. So we don't want to include the guys who are part of preserving family history as well. It just happens.
But it's history month, we're focusing on women.
Exactly. So, and this is kind of one of those lesser discussed aspects of preserving history. But as we mentioned earlier in the interview, it's a long tradition. And, I often will get asked, why are there so many soldiers' letters? Where are the civilian letters? And if you think about it, a soldier's going to write home, and his mother, his sister, his sweetheart, they're going to hold on to that letter and preserve it in that immediate time. And then, maybe had been involved in later preservation of it, maybe not. But they're keeping his letters safe. As much as he might cherish the letters from the home front, he's in camp, he's on campaign, he's going into battle. He may or may not be able to preserve those letters coming from the home front. And so it's really fascinating how, because women were on the home front getting these soldiers' letters, they're able to be kind of that first line of preservation, and how grateful we are. So the next time you're in an archive going through a soldier's letter collection or diaries, just think about who did these first steps of preservation. It's a really fascinating thing to think about. So,
well, and in fairness, in my family, this photo was found by a gentleman in our family who does ancestry. And again, in fairness, this booklet was done by a gentleman in our family.
Sure.
So I got to give him
Everyone's
credit.
involved for sure. Well, do you have any other parting words of wisdom or any last stories to share as we're getting ready to wrap up the interview here?
Yes, be sure that you collect it, do your homework, and pass it on. Don't let it stop with you, because if it stops with you, the future doesn't know.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And thanks for joining me. And we look forward to sharing this with all our viewers. So that's Stephanie Huffman in Nashville, Tennessee.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. It was really a privilege and an honor to be able to share my history with your listeners.
Well, thanks for coming. And I hope you have a very nice Women's History Month and discover lots of amazing stories along the way.
Thank you.